My talk is going to be more of an overview to let you know what's going on in the United States. It's probably going to be the least scientific talk that you'll see today because that's where we're at in the United States. We're still working on our science and trying to get caught up with the rest of the world. This is my outline. I'll cover where we're at, how we do screening, what our outcomes have been, and then sort of our gaps, controversies, issues, why we differ from the European view, and then the future directions where we think we need to head. Well, no talk on sports cardiology in the United States can be given without talking about Dr. Barry Maron, who by default, because of his interest in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, was our sports cardiologist for 30 years in the United States. Many of you have read his papers, and these are probably some of the more important ones that he's published, which are the AHA elements and the Bethesda Conference, which is our equivalent of the participation guidelines. I appreciate everything very much that Barry has done. But then we had the Corrado paper come out in 2006, and thank you very much for publishing that paper. It caused quite a stir in the United States, and all of a sudden we had a flurry of activity and interest in EKG screening, which we were not really prepared for, and hope to point that out during the course of this talk. But I will tell you that we went from like 0 EKG screening, we went to like almost 50% of the country doing EKG screening at one point. I'm boarded in cardiology. Mainly I was interested in heart failure, transplant, cardiomyopathy, and electrophysiology, and then I got my sports medicine board so I could be a team doctor with United States figure skating. And when I did that, I started to see both sides of this issue. I had seen so far Barry's work, and the American Heart was sort of, I would have to say, anti-EKG screening. And then that was my cardiology hat that I had on. When I went over to sports medicine and learned that field, I realized sports cardiology is a more athlete-centered activity. It's not a disease-centered activity or a technology-focused activity. And so I said, we need to all get together, all those that are interested in the cardiovascular care of the athlete. So I went to the American College and we formed the American College of Cardiology Sports and Exercise Council. We started with 150 people. We're now up to 4,000. And half of them are young people, the fellows that we've seen presenting up here that are working with Dr. Sharma. And we've got an intense interest in the United States. And I knew it back in 2006. I could sense it. So far what we've accomplished is we've come up with a program that we've had for 3 years now. I would encourage anybody who's doing research here to submit your things to not only the American College, but also to the program that we do every year. We just started doing original research. I suspect we'll get funding for this program again next year, and I'd love to hear everything that was presented today. I'd love to hear it at our conference, which is held in the fall. We just had it in September. So you've got a whole year to prepare now, okay? We came out with 2 papers because, like I said, we were disease and technology focused. We had to explain to people what sports cardiology was. I also thought I'd get a lot further if I didn't frame it around the EKG topic, and if I just presented it as that the athlete is a unique patient. And so we did get pretty far by doing it that way. We explained what it was to people, and then we had a think tank 2 years ago, because if you look at the names on here, you'll see that there are people who are adamantly pro-EKG and adamantly against EKG. It took us 2 years to have our debate internally, and we finally got this paper published on what we want to do in the United States, something we could all agree upon. It just came out, I think, yesterday or the day before. So if you want, you can take a look at it in JAC. Now, how do we screen in the United States? Well, we basically have 3 screening guidelines. We've got our AHA elements published in 2007. Those are embedded in the PPE 4th edition, which is what the primary care doctors use to conduct pre-participation exam. Once you detect an abnormality, then you follow the 36th Bethesda Conference. Now, the Bethesda Conference has been revised. It's going to be published. I heard there was a delay now until the springtime on this publication, and I'm not sure why. But at any rate, we're waiting. I don't think it's going to be that much changed from the previous document. How do we actually do it, the nitty-gritty? Well, an athlete will present to any one of a variety of doctors. And our system is very different from the Italian system. In the United States, we have 330 million people and about 50 million athletes. And you will present to either a primary care doctor or a sports medicine or team doctor, a nurse practitioner, PA, or even a chiropractor. And people chuckle with the chiropractors, but 35% of our states allow chiropractors to conduct the pre-participation physical exam. It doesn't really matter, to be honest with you, because I did a study in the state of Nebraska, and we found out that nobody was actually trained in how to do a PPE, all right, including the chiropractors, because our Attorney General had decided that it was perfectly legal and in their scope of work to conduct a physical exam. We don't have a huge CRI center, you know, and this has really been illuminating for me to come here. And our funding issues, it's very difficult to get funding for a center like this. So at any rate, you'll present as an athlete to any one of these. They should be doing that fourth pre-participation examination. And then if they find something, they should send to the cardiologist. Regardless who's clearing them, they should follow the Bethesda guidelines. How many athletes and their governing bodies and their doctors are actually following this scheme? Well, certainly at the American professional team level, this scheme is followed. There are some unique modifications, for instance, in soccer and American football. There's going to be things that are in the PPE that are specific for that sport. But pretty much uniformly, they follow the PPE. Also, our collegiate level, NCAA, it's required on entry. At the high school level, the National Federation of High Schools recommends this fourth PPE, but they kind of leave the details to each state. Our states have a lot of autonomy, but I will tell you that about 48 states require or suggest that people do this fourth PPE. Surprisingly, there's a few that don't recommend it at all, and we could debate that later. In youth sports, club sports, such as hockey or lacrosse, tennis, things like this, skating, for instance, there's no formal requirements. We didn't even conduct a pre-participation physical exam in skating until I became the chair of the committee, and that was in 2008. And I said, I think we should be examining these kids. I think we should be doing a pre-participation exam. Anyway, let's look at our H&P, and I'm focusing on the United States here. This was Asif put together this table. Aaron Bagish looked at collegiate athletes, and if you conduct a meticulous PPE, you'll actually detect the underlying cardiac abnormality about 30% of the time in his study. Vicki Vetter, who is a pediatric electrophysiologist, she looked at American children and adolescents, and she found that the H&P alone would detect about 20%. Now, this is an improvement compared to the mid-90s when we had about 3% detection rate in the United States from Barry Maron's work. So it seems that if you meticulously apply this stuff, you're actually going to get a decent result, not a perfect result, but decent. Now, what's the problem? Well, the fourth PPE we said was our gold standard, right? But if you ask a group of primary care physicians, did they ever even hear of the fourth PPE in the United States, you'll find that practically 75% of them never even heard of the PPE, yet they are the ones that are clearing the athletes for participation. So we have a tremendous problem with marketing the PPE alone, just the simple H&P alone. Other doctors have shown this as well, and the other problem that physicians have, and chiropractors and everybody else, is they're unsure what to do with the information once they get it. And 36% in Madsen's study here were unsure even how to perform a physical examination in an athlete. That's pretty remarkable. So people talk in the United States about infrastructure problems. This is how it's manifesting in some of the data. So let's talk EKG screening, okay? It's a very popular subject over in Europe, and I think that all the investigators here have really added a lot to the body of knowledge. So let's go back to our collegiate and our adolescents in the United States. If you add EKG, you'll see that you're pretty much double or triple your ability to pick up that underlying heart disease. So why am I going through all this? Because you folks know this already, right? But the thing is, in the United States, we have to show people that this is what to expect when you do EKG screening, and that there is some value added of the EKG. So what's happening in terms of EKG screening? PPE we already talked about. Certainly at the professional level, the EKG screening has been done for many years in 90% of the teams in American football, NBA, NHL, Major League Soccer, Major League Baseball. Olympic level, yes, EKG screening is being done. NCAA, about 30 to 50% of the NCAA schools will utilize, this is at the collegiate level, and it's mainly, the collegiates are divided into level 1, 2, and 3. Division 1 is the highest level of sport. They're almost like professional. And I would say that the 50% is probably more in that Division 1 level, and it may be even higher now because the NCAA is moving very quickly towards suggesting that everybody get an EKG at the collegiate level. High school level, EKG has not been recommended mainly because the American Heart Association has not recommended EKG screening. And again, youth, where we have 44 million athletes, they're not served at all by the EKG screening process unless the parents take them to one of the screening centers, which are generally volunteer screening programs. Such as this one. Dr. Malosi, I don't know if she made it here today, she was in London this week. She runs a program in Texas called the Championship Hearts Foundation, and they have screened kids voluntarily there. They have a grant, and they've been able to do EKG and echo in many of the kids in Texas, and they've been doing a great job down there. And she's going to be, she is actually the new co-chair of the group that I founded. Now, I went to Alaska recently, and Alaska's part of the United States, but we even screen dogs in the United States, okay, even though we're not screening our youth. These are these sled dogs that race, and before the race, they have to have a pre-race EKG, and it's got to be done within 30 days of the start. They go through a lot during the race. It's like their version of the marathon or ultra marathon. So other species have caught on to this EKG screening thing. Now, where did we get all hung up? I mean, and I'm a middle child, by the way, and I'm trying to bridge the gap. I've been trying to do this for the last few years between the folks that are the anti-EKG and the folks that are vehemently pro-EKG. And I think we've got both types in our sports cardiology group. We present both types of papers at our meetings. And this is the incidence of sudden cardiac death according to the type of athlete and the level of athlete. And I just want to take, I know epidemiology can be a bit sleep-inducing, but let's just look at it very carefully because this is kind of where we're all hung up, at least one of the spots where we're all hung up. So if you look at, let's look at this blue thing here. This is Diane Adkins who published this. This is just the incidence of sudden cardiac arrest and sudden cardiac death in a population of young people up to age 19. You see that it's 6.7 per 100,000, okay? So that's sort of, if you will, like a control group. If you look at a group of high school students who are down here, first of all, we had an interesting thing happen in the state of Minnesota. We had 3 researchers all report on the same cohort, and they got 3 different answers to the rate of sudden death. And we realized we can't just be looking retrospectively or at media reports. We've got to get better data. So the NIH said, you know what, let's have a youth sudden cardiac death registry. And so that was created just this year, and it will be starting to collect data in 13 centers throughout the United States. Won't be the entire United States, but we'll get some information on the sudden cardiac death rate in youths, and some of them will be athletes. If you look, though, at Dr. Roberts' data, he only got 0.24 per 100,000. Now, the thing that was interesting about his paper was that he only included people who were actively participating in high school sports. So it was a very contained population, like the NCAA population. And the one thing that he didn't include, though, were the resuscitated sudden deaths, which in the high school population, we think we're up to about 65 to 85% resuscitation rate. So his figure could have been higher if he would included that sudden cardiac arrest rate. Dr. Maron included all, and he also included people in club sports, so his was a little bit higher. And then what I don't have on here is Dr. Dresner came in with a letter in response, and he had looked at the Parent Heart Watch data, and he got pretty much the same thing that Maron had gotten. So I think we can conclude that at the high school level, our rate of sudden cardiac death is actually quite low. Now, if you get to the collegiates, which are right in through here, this is Dr. Harmon's work. Let's look at Division I here. It's quite high compared to the high school level, okay? And then if you look particularly at the NCAA black athlete, the collegiate black athlete, it's very high. And if you look at a basketball athlete, it's 31. It's 3 times higher than what I'm showing there. So we've learned a lot. You know, where are we at is what I'm trying to say here. And where are we at? We've learned a lot about the epidemiology of sudden cardiac death in our country. And we think that it varies according to what level you're playing at. It varies according to ethnicity, and it varies according to sport. Why do we get hung up on this? Because if you were to, okay, I'm putting my hardcore cardiology hat on for a second. I was raised in a heart failure, cardiomyopathy background, very high risk conditions, and to prove that something worked, like a defibrillator, you had to randomize to the defibrillator versus no defibrillator. And then you had to show differences in endpoints, and we're talking hardcore endpoints, like sudden cardiac death, sudden cardiac arrest. With heart failure, you have events like that happening 10 to 20% per year. But that's not happening, this is happening 0.7 per 100,000 in the high school population. You have to randomize the whole solar system to show differences in endpoints. So our debate, if you will, has switched from eliminating sudden cardiac death, which we know if we find underlying high-risk conditions, we're actually going to do that. Our debate has shifted to, let's find the high-risk cardiac conditions. And that's sort of a more moderate approach, and we seem to be making some headway there. Now, I cannot finish this talk without talking about the Maron ECG paper that just came out, I think it was last week, or I think around September 15th, actually. And Dr. Maron and his team spent a lot of time looking at an exhausting number of references. And basically, this paper had to do with assessing the 12-lead EKG as a screening test for detecting cardiovascular disease in young people. And I don't know how easy this is to see here, but I want to point out that the main thing on this paper is they said that mandatory and universal mass screening with 12-lead EKGs in young, healthy people was not indicated. It's a class 3, no evidence of benefit, and level of evidence C. But I also will say that they said that what we're doing here at CRI, for instance, and what Dr. Sharma and his team are doing, is not to be thrown out. I mean, we like to say, oh, American Heart, they don't believe in anything that's being done over here, but I don't think that's true. I think that here is the class 2B, level of evidence C, but clearly it says here that if you really know what you're doing and you're an expert, there is a place for that in selected groups of young people, and perhaps athletes are included. I believe they are. I believe that especially at higher levels, they're at higher risk. I've done EKG screening for Major League Soccer. I worked as their cardiologist for 5 years, and I can tell you that here's a case of somebody that I think that we saved this person's life. This is a pretty classic EKG from somebody with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. I want to point out here, this EKG is at half standard, so these T waves would actually be way down to here, so would these. So this was pretty classic, and he had an MRI, which showed apical form of the disease. And how can you say no play to a face like that? It's very, very hard. But, you know, we sat down and talked with him. His name is Zach Harold. I have his permission to talk about him. And he was crushed after this. He did not play for 2 years. He didn't do anything for 2 years. He had to go on medication for depression. This, by the way, I think is another important thing to point out that doesn't always come out in that we have to be firm in our recommendations. A lot of times people are allowed to play when they shouldn't be. Anyway, after 2 years, he's recovered from his depression, and he actually has become a coach for the Red Bulls, which are the New York professional soccer team. So he's happy and doing well. This is another real case from the United States. This is another Major League Soccer recruit who underwent EKG screening at the local team level. And this is the kind of thing that made me realize we need to cultivate sports cardiology in the United States. He had his routine EKG screening. What would you say, the panel here, just quickly, play or no play? What do you think? Dr. Corrado, Dr. Heidbuckle? You would say play or no play?
It's hard to see the ECG from here.
Oh, sorry about that. We can ask everybody, play? How many say play?
In my opinion, this is a typical early repolarization of Afro-Caribbean athletes' heart.
Yeah,
So in
I
other
would
words,
allow.
this kind of
Allowed?
STT wave pattern with J point elevation preceding ST segment elevation, the negative T waves, limited to precordial leads V1 to
Okay,
V3
great.
is normal.
And I think Dr. Sharma said play, and you said allow, and several in the audience said allow. So what happened was this player was told, do not play. You have to have a cardiac MRI, an echo, an exercise test, a Holter monitor, and you have to wear a life vest, an external defibrillator, until you are allowed to play based on the results of all this testing. So the trainer who was in Texas actually called me, and I happened to be in Nebraska that week, and he was telling me the story, and he sent me the EKG. And I said exactly what you folks did. I said, put that guy in a plane and send him up here. He didn't have the life vest on when he came. I said, how come you're not wearing it? And he said, I wasn't going to wear that thing. I didn't think anything was wrong with me. But this is where we've got to, you know, we talked a lot about the false positives, and we have to educate in the United States. This was read by a team cardiologist for Major League Soccer. So anyway, I started the talk with, the name of this talk was Facts and Fallacy, and I just want to conclude with, we have some different types of athletes in the United States, and there was a reason why the opening slide had an American football player and then what I guess the rest of the world calls a football player. And you could see they don't look like each other. And the American football players tend to be very, very big. I got some of these slides from Dr. Dick Kovacs, who is the cardiologist involved with the NFL Combine. 20% of the players weigh over 300 pounds. And we saw the slide earlier from one of the presenters that 1.7% of athletes have a wall thickness of 1.3 cm, but 10% of the American football players are over 1.3 cm. And they've looked at aortic root size as well. And the main reason I'm presenting all that is in the States at the moment, we're starting to look at our group of athletes. We don't feel that we can rely totally on data that's been generated already in Europe. We feel that we have some unique athlete populations. We have a high incidence of blacks, African Americans playing in sports in all the different areas. And so we've developed now over the last 6 years an increased awareness. We've improved our organization. We communicate with each other. We are using the PPE, but we're aware now that docs don't really know what they're doing with the PPE. EKG screening is popular at professional and collegiate levels, but not done on the high school athletes unless you've got a local program going that is non-mandatory and is volunteer. And we're recognizing this heterogeneity and how much research we need to do. In the paper we just published, we said, you know, we need to take the stuff that we have and optimize its use and really educate people on how to use it. Then maybe we can move to EKG screening, but once we've gotten the basics down, all right? It sounds so rudimentary, but this is and I don't think we're that different from the rest of the world, to be honest with you. The one thing we are doing very good at is AEDs, and we did a very quick study in Nebraska, and we found that 97% of our schools now have at least one AED, and the outcomes on this particular project, we had opened the AED in 17 cases, shock was delivered in 8, only 2 were students, most of them were older people, which is what others have shown, but the 2 young people survived, 2 out of 2 survived to hospital discharge, and then the older people, we had an 87.5% resuscitation rate. So this was excellent. I gave Nebraska a gold star. I do consulting work for them. So at any rate, I'm going to end there. I thank you for your attention very much. Thanks.